I'm Nova Han. I'm a creative director for music festivals, stage shows, concerts, and immersive experiences around the world. My work has been seen by hundreds of thousands at festivals like Coachella, Electric Forest, Burning Man, and Firefly. I've worked with artists like Deadmau5, Bass Nectar, and the String Cheese Incident. My job has me searching the globe to discover the industry's best artists in installations, performance, movement, set design, costumes, and emerging technologies to create some of the world's greatest live entertainment experiences. Audiences see the awe-inspiring spectacle of the final product, but they have no idea what it takes to get there. We the Creators explores the lives of the artists behind the magic, what drives them to do what they do, the sacrifices they've made, and the pain they've overcome to make art at any cost. Behind every great artist is an even greater story. This is We the Creators. Hi friends, yay! Welcome to the very first We Are the Creators. Today we're with my friend Erin Taylor Kuffner, who is a noted composer, a kinetic sculptor, electronic music maverick, a machinist, an installation artist, an ad hoc engineer, an ambassador of Indonesian music tradition, a prolific street artist, theater director, poetic terrorist, instrument builder, social activist, and a badass dad. He is most well known for his Gamelatron, which is the intersection between Indonesian bronze gongs, technology, sound, sculpture, and installation art. His works have been seen at Burning Man, Renwick Gallery at the Smithsonian Institute, and the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. This is Erin.
So what I'm doing is I'm tuning all these gongs slightly different from each other so that when they play, they create this beating and phasing effect, which adds like a chorusing kind of thing. It adds this whole other dimension. It also adds tempo in places we normally don't hear. I've been an artist my whole life. It's the only thing I ever remember wanting to do. But I've taken on a lot of different mediums. So I kind of consider myself a conceptual artist just because I don't have one stable medium. But I always have an idea of what I want to share.
That was awesome.
Hey.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Happy to be here, and I loved your video. I learn more about the things you do every time I see like my friend's sizzle reels.
I know. Great to have you. So for those of you just tuning in, this is an interactive show. You can post your comments, put up questions directly into the chat, and we will do a live Q&A after the show. But for now, let's talk to Erin. So you have this giant laundry list of professions. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And going from that entire laundry list, how did it culminate to the Gamelatron? Like, I've had this very profound experience kind of being around it as a spectator, but like, what about the Gamelatron really gets your juices going?
Well, it's different for me because there's this duality between like creating something that stands in front of me and that I can I'm not saying hide behind, but like I very intentionally pull myself away from it because I want it to stand on its own, in part because I am a deeply flawed person, and I don't want my flaws to get in the way, and my ego and like all my whatever to get in the way of the work, because I think the work has the possibility of being transcendent of my flaws and who I am, and that art can be the best offering that I have, or that all of us have. And so So I kind of stay back and I try to observe it the best I can, kind of fly on the wall or like from an outside point of view. But I can never shut off the duality of like the fact that I made it, and that usually I'm like embroiled in some kind of like technical thing where I'm like noticing like, oh, how something is technically moving or something like that. So for me, seeing it live with other people is like it's pleasurable, but it's also this kind of strange thing that divides me into 3 people or 4 people all at once, between being the spectator, the creator, but then also like trying to recognize the phenomenon beyond what I can even perceive as a kind of flawed, imperfect kind of guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, is this in response to times when you've noted yourself as a poetic terrorist? And and if so, like, what is that? Can you tell us what a poetic terrorist is and what that means?
Okay, so yeah, you grabbed a couple of things from my bio. So poetic terrorism. Gosh, how much time do we have? So keep it short. There is this guy, Peter Lambord Wilson is his name. I don't think he's aged so well in the Me Too movement, but putting those things aside right now, he wrote under a pen name called Hakim Bey in the it's like late 80s, early 90s. New York squatter. He wrote a series of essays called The Taz, or the Temporary Autonomous Zone. Mm-hmm. And as I was kind of like in the late 80s or the 90s, and I was like going through my adolescence into early adulthood, these essays fell on me, and they really resonated strongly with me as like kind of a seminal text to to an impressionable artist. And one of the things he talked about, and I we could talk about this longer and I could bring in references and stuff, but he made a kind of a joke in the statement about Santa Claus, and how Santa Claus is those poetic terrorists. He breaks into your house, and rather than stealing things like a robber, he leaves you presents and gifts. And he's like, what if you kidnap someone and convince them, even just for a moment, that they were like the inheritor of a universe that was in harmony and full of sublime beauty, which of course I believe is true. We just have to recognize it. That would be the role of the poetic terrorist, And I took this quite literally in my life with a lot of different my art practices. Like I became a put pocket rather than a pickpocket, where I would like put things in people's pockets. So rather than them discovering like, holy shit, where'd my wallet go? They're like, how did I get this poem on the back of this card embossed with a cicada on it? And what is that? And then start realizing that there were these mythical creatures out there, like fulfilling some kind of larger duty to bring some kind of like joy and profound sublime nature, into your life, rather than, there's enough people that are pickpocketing you, both metaphorically and physically.
What were
that's what a poetic terrorist is in my book.
Some of the things that you did, like list a couple of like the more prolific experiments that you did as a poetic terrorist.
Well, probably the first. There's two larger projects, at least in hindsight. Gosh, is there two? There's like 4 larger projects. So let's pick 2. I got really into cicadas, the insect. The mythology around it. In New York, I think it was 1996, the 17-year cicadas were coming out outside the city. And that is pretty amazing when all these insects just sing, fuck, and die. Basically in a 30-day period, they all like their whole survival is based on like burying themselves underground for 16 years and 11 months and then emerging en masse, satiating all their prey, and then having enough of them left behind to climb up to trees, belt out this like polyphonic sound in order to encourage mating, in order to mate and then just die. They don't even have time to eat, And I was like, how insanely beautiful and Dionysian is this insect? And so I really realized early on that like art to me didn't matter unless it mattered to someone else, unless it was like continuing a dialogue, unless it was creating the sublime, unless it was like creating joy within someone or forwarding a conversation. There was no art for art's sake. There was no art just because I liked it. There was none of that met the test of making it worthy of putting energy into it. So I said, okay, I'm going to take cicadas and do this full-blown advertising campaign for them. Not to sell anything, not because there was like some kind of financial gain at the end, but use the tools of capitalism and marketing in order to send out this other narrative. This narrative that there are these insects that live these crazy lives, and that throughout history, the Hopi would take cicada carcasses and put them under the tongue of deceased people, buried them. And then later, when the cicada came back, they carried the souls out of the bardo and into the heavens or the next place. They were like these intermediaries, or their shells would be ground up in ancient Egypt and used as like elixirs for like rebirth and such. And so I did all this research to find out all these different ways that cicadas were used in different historical contexts. And I would make these cards that I would put pocket in people. But I went farther, and I had like one of those guns from a retail job where I would put tags, physical tags on clothing. So I would go into like malls and I would make it seem like it was a whole cicada clothing line, or it was like a sub-product of Ralph Lauren or something, it was like cicada, where now we're going to tell you about these things, and print my own toilet paper and go into like restaurants and like replace their toilet paper with mine, or napkins and things like that, or coasters. And I had like a whole line of things. But ultimately I did a lot of graffiti. But I guess I called it graffiti because street art wasn't a term I had ever heard of, before. And I knew what I was doing was illegal as well. And I wasn't, shy about that. I felt like it was okay as long as I didn't get caught. And I did mostly stencils and some wheat paste work. The reason why this became, I didn't really know my boundaries at all. And I didn't realize like how prolific I had become. And I did eventually get arrested in a pretty bad way and charged with 5,000 misdemeanors. And it took me a long time and really, really changed the course of my life because I had to live some years under a different name and, stop going under my social security number and a lot of things like that. So that in itself, the whole pilgrimage of this project made me change the way in which I lived.
Right, because when we first met, you were Taylor, so I'm actually getting used to the reroute of the name. Yeah, so you were, and what I love about some of these stories of the past, of just like the way that you were experimenting socially, is that you were really, and I feel like you've said this to me before, you've used this word social sculpting, like being a social sculptor, which I love that term. And what was some of the first things that you did as a social sculptor?
Well, a lot of it's kind of hindsighted. The term social sculpture, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but me taking credit for it is I'm sure completely wrong. But more like I'm appropriating it, and wherever I got it was in the ether. It maybe came from Jeff Stark, if you know, like the Nonsense List, and William Atundi, like The Danger and Complacent Nation and You Are So Lucky, who are two friends that I consider in the same artistic circle in like kind of spanning the last 20 years in New York, especially in like underground, above ground, going between the two, like definitely being the zeitgeist of culture, but also coming at it from not from.
What's your version of social sculpting? Like, what did you?
It's any time in which the medium, the actual like clay of the sculpture, are people, and are people's interaction, or what people are experiencing is the shape and form of that artwork.
Okay, so give us an example of like what have you like I recall you telling me this story about selling Sky subscriptions.
Yeah, sure. So myself and this guy, James Leonard, we were going to college in Syracuse at the time. It didn't last too long for me. Lasted longer for him. He was a better student. But we started a company, like a legitimate company. We had documents and stuff to prove it, as door-to-door salesmen selling. It was called Sky and Culture Corporation. And so we sold subscriptions to Sky and membership plans to Culture. And we had, assumed identities, kind of, we had a room in my attic where we would like go method and be that identity, that person. And we had our clothes and our props, the whole thing. And we would go door to door trying to convince people that they should get a subscription plan to Sky, and saying, we could have it delivered in the front or in the back. We could do a side yard subscription, or you could just go for the full 360. You could do the Sunday edition.
What were they buying? What was Culture as a product? What did they think they were going to get?
Well, Sky was just a metaphor for culture. So if we got people to realize that their subscription, they were subscribing to it just by paying attention to it, just by realizing it was there, and that it was a medium in which things happened in, and that by looking out their window and seeing that the sky was there, that they were subscribing to it. That was the metaphor for culture. That if you got a membership plan to Culture, that's simply by saying, I am going to be part of this culture. I am going to participate. All my interactions now are going to be on the level of me being a participant in culture. And just that conceptual switch helps frame how someone would live. Mm-hmm. And so the sculpture aspect is like within the we're selling to. Right.
That's and like, first of all, I fucking love that you did that. I just love that. It is so like tenacious and generous in so many ways. It's like to get up day after day, make the documentation, get the costuming, knock on people's doors, really put yourself out there. That's a lot of work.
We were trying to get credit for it in college as like an independent study. It didn't really work out, but
Still, well, okay, so that makes some sense. I'm like, how did you pay the bills? Like, how did you,
No.
It's one thing to go around selling a fake subscription, but like at some point you need to pay the bills.
No, the bills are a totally different thing. Like I live the dream now, in the last, I don't know how many years, I just make Gamelatrons, and I, wake up every day, and that's my job. And that's amazing. But, I'm not young, I'm my late 40s now. And for the majority of my adult time before that, I just had job after job after job, anything from being like a horrible male stripper to like working in drag as a busboy to
I want to hear more about this.
It just runs the gamut but the whole time I was an artist, because I looked at money as an art supply, and I looked at those jobs weren't separate from my art practice. Those jobs were a meaningful part of my art practice, even if it was just to get money in order to fund these crazy other ideas. And so it's not 10,000 hours, it's 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 hours in which I had to self-fund. And that these jobs were the self-funding. They were the grant-making wing. They were the they were the funding wing of whatever project I was working on. And so I was able to keep a pretty good disposition about waiting tables for a decade, because when I went into work, I wasn't like thinking, oh God, I really want to be making art, but I have to do this. And of course, I probably thought that some, but what I really was thinking was like, all right, this is the time. It's like going to Home Depot to get art, some art supplies or something. It's part of the day's job. Whereas I'm an artist. I am funding, let's say, like, I don't know, running a pirate radio station out of a bread truck, that stages, illicit dance parties, spontaneously in the middle of streets and community gardens Like, that's my artistic medium right now. But obviously it has no funding. So great. I found this other way, this front of the house way of bringing in money in order to make it possible for me to have a life. And then, being really economical, all overflow would be reinvested in the things that I cared about. And I did that for 20 years.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point, because I love how you have explored the gamut of arts, from like quote unquote lowbrow to highbrow. And that's the question, is like, do you feel like it's necessary that a person has to make a highbrow pivot to actually make money in this field?
Oh man.
It's hard.
I don't know. I play a game where I don't neatly fit into any of the categories, but I fit in well enough in order to be able to shift between them. So, like, for instance, when I'm doing something at like the Smithsonian, or the Hammer Museum, okay, I'm looking at that. I'm like kind of the outsider, where I'm doing something that's like more interactive, or like I'm turning the space into like a sanctuary where people can do, like personal, vision quest journeys or something like that, which is like outside the normal spectrum of, say, museums and such. But then when I'm in, let's say, like a festival environment, or in like a wellness environment, let's say at a spa, like I have Gamelatron set up in spas and things like that, then I seem like I'm the sculptor, like coming out of this like fine art world, like, oh, he showed at the Venice Biennale, and now it's like he's pivoting in order to have this in a space that's like, like a wellness retreat. And so I kind of play them off of each other, because I'm not either one, but I kind of I get a little more leeway in both, because I don't need to be either. And I like to play them off of each other, because I don't see such a high art, low art distinction necessary for my life.
Right.
But I recognize that the world does. And so I might as well play them off of each other, in order, also as a business, in order to have multiple streams of revenue, or multiple streams of exhibition, or to be able to reach people that are coming from different modalities. Because there's certain people that will definitely go to the wellness retreat, but will not go to that museum.
Right.
Or would go to this festival, but wouldn't necessarily go to, I don't know, an empty warehouse, where I've done like a sanctuary or something. And just trying to be true to what I'm doing, no matter what context I partner with, in order to show it and recognize that the work can transcend it.
Well, and I feel like what's so beautiful about some of like your earlier works was how centered you were around really teaching a lesson of sorts, like how, and I wonder if like, and it was in this really like renegade punk rock way. Like I remember you telling me the story of delivering carved watermelons to the, can you tell everyone that story really fast? So it's such a good one. I definitely
didn't think that I was teaching anybody anything.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't my goal, nor like do I think of myself as knowing something well enough in order to do that, nor am I like want to be imposing in that kind of way. I look at it more like everything I do is an offering. And it's a good offering if it can have impact on people's lives, hopefully in a positive direction, or like share kind of a sense of beauty with them that like allows them to evolve, grow, change, and keep moving us forward in this whole evolutionary cycle. So when you get into something like the Assault Poetry Unit, which was a project my brother and I did, the Assault Poetry Unit was, it was a lot of things. The main thing that we did was make art objects, which would be ready-made things that we usually like found in the trash, and we retrofitted in different ways. One was a watermelon, in which we carved into the side of a watermelon Czeslaw Milosz poem, Seasons of Watermelon. And then we had things like typewriters and toy guns and xylophones, and we'd pick different poems that somehow related to those objects. But then we would give these objects with like a kind of like a beat poet manifesto, saying, we're not going to stop giving you these like obtuse kind of poetic, artistic objects until you meet our demands. And our demands would be these like kind of long-winded listed things. Like we did a big project in New Orleans, and it was like all mayoral addresses have to be in iambic pentameter. We will not stop giving you these until these presents, until you take the Marlboro billboard that's on Decatur Street and put on the Ishmael Reed poem like Boat of Ra, Cowboy and Boat of Ra, something like that.
If you're gonna read me my Miranda rights, it has to be in a haiku.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole bottom line to it, at least with the New Orleans version of that project, was this is the city that has the lowest at the time. This is in the late '90s, the lowest literacy rate. And that funding seemed to just be so disproportionately not spent in a way that would like consider literacy important versus all these other things. And our response to that was to like make these ready-made art objects and hand deliver them to like city officials and the DA and the owner of Brennan's restaurant and Big Daddy's strip club. The only problem is those people weren't so well versed in this art form, and the FBI ended up finding us and charged us with 13 felony terrorizing charges of, they were terrorizing local officials with these like, art bombs. And, the bomb squad literally had to like, carefully take apart a watermelon, make sure there was no bomb inside of it after we evacuated multiple universities, city hall, news stations and things like that. And, that ended up being part of my going on the lam for years, which was very pivotal in learning about the way in which the world worked and like,
Yeah, I wonder if you did that nowadays, if it would just be like, get the fuck out of here, we got bigger fish to fry, or if it would go the opposite way. It's hard to know in this political climate.
It is hard to say, but it was 23 years ago. I was actually just checking on the date because there was like a NPR All Things Considered clip, and there's a talk I did at the National Arts Club where I played the clip, the recording of the NPR thing, and I listened to it earlier today, just as I was like checking the date. And just the way we receive media and news is so radically different in the last 23 years. And I also think 9/11 changed things a lot with just even the word poetic terrorism. Like just because it had the word terrorism in there, like it's just different. It's just a mental shift has happened, and we're in the middle of this other mental shift now with like I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I feel like there's going to be, when we tell history, and we're going to have this period from like 2001, like the Trade Center to COVID-19. Like this is right. Like a cultural block now. And this was in the pre 9/11 block, which would be its own block. I don't know exactly when it starts. Like I would say in New York City, it would be from like when they bulldozed like Tompkins Square Park to 9/11, and that was its own like cultural, artistic, and like block of time, which I fell into, and now I'm like straddling my third block, whatever it is, after COVID-19, and my art will reflect that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think all of our art is shifting drastically because of this time marker. I'm really curious to see what's going to come of it. I think a huge explosion, obviously, of digital media. That's a huge commodity right now. It'll be really fascinating to see the ways in which we all shift.
Well, what's interesting is that we've put, in the rise of the digital age, we put a higher and higher premium in a lot of ways on actually connecting, the immediacy of connecting face to face and creating this siloed existence of like what we do online versus what the people I actually like touch and hold. And there's right now, I think it took us a little while to get there, but in the last couple of years, that was a prized commodity. And when you think about all the things like you're working on, the experiential market, where it's like it's about connecting, about touching, about experiencing, about feeling it. Even like, museums going in that direction, just trying to make everything like this event that you can touch, feel, smell, and be inside of.
Absolutely.
And now this is like the most demonic about face to that whole tide, where it's like, how do we reinterpret it? Because it's not like that desire has left. It came about for really good reasons in the alienation of like an over-digitized world. But now it's forcing us to have to use that tool in a different way. I have no idea. I don't know.
I have no idea too, and I love that you said that, because I feel that so strongly as well. Like, I feel like with this newer generation coming in, living, growing up in screen culture, that actually the thing that feels way more fascinating is to be engaging with something that feels tactile and that has a sense of consequence, that just has a sense of like it's like, when you slide a picture and it makes a little explosion, like that's not very exciting to see two gems smash into each other and it explodes. But to like actually feel the air and the wind and the sound of a pop when you throw a dart at a balloon, like something that simple, like a simple carnival game, I feel like that is going to be more tantalizing in a way. I was hoping for that push kind of to come back to kind of objects that we can understand how we manipulate and how we have impact, how we have direct impact. So we'll see. And with that, let's open it up. I'd love to hear what some of the people in the audience are wondering. We've got a question here from Alice Wolfson. I gotta open up the script.
Does anyone remember Leroy Jones' poetry, If Revolution? Yeah, of course. It's funny. My brother would answer this better because he's more of the poet, and he was the one who just has a great literary knowledge. And this is in the Saw Poetry unit. It was part of like his baby, and he had built out like this whole selection of poems that we thought we would really use. And he was definitely works in there. Anyway, yes. Thank you.
Do we have another question?
Okay.
All right. Cool. Great. We got a quiet little audience today. So I'd like to ask another thing, which is like, what do you feel like, what do you feel like facing certain challenges? Like, how has that helped your artistry? Because we're obviously in this really interesting, social crunch right now. And how has, like, in the past, facing a specific challenge has helped you?
I don't want to make it seem like I'm reactionary, but I think that it's a symbiosis of reacting to everything in your environment, synthesizing it, and then putting it out as your own unique voice. And so there's no distinction. It's like everything that happens becomes part of this amalgamated whole that then like is chewed on, is tasted, and it's sweat out your pores, or it's like put together in all different ways. I don't know. I'm trying to answer this in the context of like what's going on right now, but we're so in the moment that like it's like mind messing me up to think like, how am I reacting, or how am I synthesizing the world that we're in right now and the situation that we're in right now in order to put something meaningful out there and to have my art be a reflection of this time and moment.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to see when you're a fish in the water. What you see is you can't see the water, right?
Yeah.
Until you step out, so you're enough away. Right on. Well, with that, I guess, would like to maybe. Oh, we do? Oh, we have another question. Cool. say?
What do you miss most? Please discuss how to grow your own joy during this rebirth. What do I miss? And I'm going to guess that they just mean in context of like the last couple months of like cultural shift that we've had.
The old world.
I mean, it's the simplest thing that I miss is touch and gathering. I mean, I've built like the Gamelatron project I've been working on for the last 12 years, and it's all been made in the context of being able to have a place for people to come and congregate in like this kind of non-denominational but semi-spiritual practice that meets people wherever they're at, and that they're able to have this kind of open platform experience that they can incorporate into their life practice in order to edify them. And I can't do that. And so I feel like, I miss being able to have people together and to be able to share in community with people. And I don't think that digitally it's going to be the same. But that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. For you. We have another question from Michael Janning, who wants to know how and where did you start building this Gamelatron?
Okay, so the Gamelatron is a series of sonic kinetic sculptures, which I began in 2008 working with a technologist named Eric Singer, who had already robotized a bunch of musical robots. I had lived in Indonesia for many years and had studied classic Indonesian gamelan music. And I had an artist in residency with him in order to kind of write music for these musical robots that he had made. And I tried to augment the actual physical robots that he had playing xylophones and drums and things in order to play the gongs that I brought back with me. And that was the beginning of the Gamelatron project. And over the last decade, I've turned them in more to sculptures and installations that people can come inside of and focus both on like the visual aspects of them, like things you can see behind me, as well as their tonal aspects, creating new sonic universes, like kind of creating my own tuning systems and creating a way for these sounds to relate to space, and then to have people inside of these kind of sonic cocoons surrounded by gongs that have site-responsive compositions that surround you in these special spatialized like sonic universes.
How easy is it to play the Gamelatron that's right behind you? Is there a way to just kind of do a quick
Yeah, you
demo?
just press a button. I just press a button.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, let's hear it.
Is the sound coming through?
I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear it.
Yeah, I have, in my studio I have, I don't know how many, I have like 5 Gamelatrons set up in here. This one's kind of a medium-sized one and is actually going into a client's home, but we're delayed the install until once we can like go into people's homes again.
Yeah. I've loved a spectator for the Gamelatron. I've really just seen how much it's shaped space. I've really them kind of be at a crazy festival and all of a sudden dive into the meditative space themselves.
Okay. Well, okay. So do you think that every intense cultural change happens in weeks? Or is this so intense? Oh, I left it. It went away. I didn't get to finish reading it. It's okay. Or is this so intense something unknown at this point? In it, there is no way to know. Again, it's kind of like what Nova said. When you're a fish, do you see the water? I think that this is the thing that's happening right now is far bigger than our comprehension, and that we're going to need a bunch of hindsight in order to even frame it to understand even what we're doing right now. And we won't really know even how we're reacting to it until we can see it from a different vantage point. And that right now it's far too close. There's no objectivity to it. I think that the speed at which things have happened and that this is mentally shifted is completely unprecedented. But it might also be this weird blip where like it also goes out so quick and it kind of leaves you with this whiplash of like, what the hell just happened? But again, we won't know. And on an artistic sense, because we're still seeing it in this, we're talking about it from the creative process side, is that I don't think that we have to produce something right now or that we even have to react to anything. I think we just have to like feel and be present in this moment and to understand the best we can what we're feeling and seeing. And that to some degree, it's part of the process to sponge the experience and to like worry about what you're going to do with it later.
Yeah. Well, for those at home, we'd like to end with a little bit of inspiration. So what would you like to share with people at home in terms of like how can they tap into their own artistry? Okay,
so you'd asked me this, so I'm glad you let me prepare just a little bit. I have no idea, who, if anyone is listening or is there, or maybe this will be archived and so it can be useful later. I do something, I started calling it the infinite ear, but again, like a lot of things, I can't take credit for that because I don't really know how I developed this technique, but I'm sure that I picked up lots of things along the way from wonderful people, known and unknown. So again, this is not something I feel I can take authorship credit for, but more like it's just passed through me and then I reframed it. So the infinite ear practice is something that I do now. I kind of do it unconsciously, but before I developed it, and it goes like this. Sit anywhere, doesn't matter where, and just listen. Okay, and as you listen, like right now I'm hearing in the background, I don't know if you heard it, but like sirens just went by. I hear the sound of rustling paper. I hear the sound of my own breath. I hear this weird nasally sound because of like the way the headphones kind of make me hear myself. I hear my breathing, and I can kind of separate out. I like doing it while I'm walking too, because you also hear things like the wind and you hear your heart beating. And take your time. Can't do it right now because it takes too much time, but just try to like make a list of all the different things you're hearing. Then, once you have that list together, it doesn't have to be exhaustive, but do your best to like pick out everything. Try to focus in on one of them at a time. So if that's only your breath, or maybe it's only the birds, or maybe it's only the sound of traffic, or maybe it's only the sound of like a refrigerator hum. And like go one by one, hearing each one of those sounds, trying to like block everything else out and just hear that one sound. All right. And what you'll start doing is almost like, I imagine like a mixing board, like I'm an audio engineer, and I like, you have like all these different faders, and like you'd have a fader, let's say if you were in the recording studio, it'd be like vocal 1 or a saxophone, put like birds, fridge hum, clock ticking, and all these different things in there. And then imagine that you're fading one up and the rest down. And you're playing this game where you're just by your focus, because obviously you can't fade up the sound of one thing or another. And once you get to the point that you can kind of master that to some degree, now transition yourself out of being an audio engineer and into being a conductor. And start to compose with the sounds in your environment by shifting your intention or your attention to these different sounds. And so you can create a drama between like a car passing by and like the far off bird as you kind of create a song between the two of them, mixing and then unmixing from each other. And then everything drops out and all you hear is the sound of your breath or your exhales, and then you slowly introduce like this the sound of the refrigerator hum as this kind of like shimmering, background drone, and you really allow yourself to hear the entirety of an orchestra within the sound field that is there, just by being able to shift your attentions around. And if you're able to do that, it'll take some time, and you'll realize that for someone like myself who struggles with emptiness meditation, clearing the mind so that you create space between your internal dialogue and the rest of the world and things, that's really hard for me. But doing exercises like this, where I'd call it like a hyper focus on a more singular entity, a similar phenomenon happens where your own internal dialogue will turn off. You will not be thinking about anything but being engrossed in that sonic environment. And it'll have a lot of the same kind of residual effects that they say that meditation can have by being able to shut off your internal dialogue and give you some space from yourself and be able to exist as one with the world around you.
That sounds like a really strong mindfulness technique, when you really are absorbing all of those micro nuances around you. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on our little show today. I really appreciate it. To all of you guys who are at home and you'd like to follow Aaron and his artistic journey, you can follow him on Instagram at Gamelatron, which is spelled Gamelatron. And if you enjoy the program and would like to see us pump out more content, we'd so appreciate your donations. They primarily go to the artist, and the small portion of it goes to this little team that continues to make this show. So your donations are super important. Very welcome. We appreciate it. Thank you. Next week, we'll have Heather and Fez on the show from Alchemy Arts. We'll be up every Wednesday at 6 p.m. PST, and on Sundays, we broadcast our neighborhood concert Glassell Canyon series, which is a concert that we do from my rooftop. We blast out music into my neighborhood. My neighbors love it. We showcase a new musician every week, and it's really sweet. So that's also on Sundays at about 7:15 p.m. So follow us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at WeHOWL X. And thank you. Stay home, stay safe, be kind, and love boldly. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.